Hello, everyone, and inside today's Locked On Canadians, we have Carey Price news and some updates. The Laval Rocket are going to the Calder Cup playoffs, and NHL officiating is so bad that everyone in the NHL actually agrees NHL officiating is bad. All that and more inside today's show.
For Locked On Canadiens, your daily podcast on the Montreal Canadiens. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 602 of Locked On Canadians. As always, thank you for making us your first listen of the day, your first watch. If you are checking us out on YouTube, please make sure you are subscribed wherever you listen or watch shows. So thank you for that. I am one of your hosts. I am Scott Matla, and I'm joined, as always, by the active stick, Laura Saba. Laura, we are one day removed from a shenanigan festival in Boston, but we're going to start on a positive note. But first, how are you doing today?
I am excited for the Rocket playoffs. It was a very emotional night last night. We were recording after I got back from the Bell Center. Feeling a little bit less emotional today, but I have to admit I'm excited for the Rocket making the playoffs for the first time in their history. Essentially, the last time they made the playoffs, they weren't the Rocket. It was before they had come to Laval, and I think we're still going to have some exciting times in Montreal, even beyond that last game between the Habs and the Florida Panthers.
Yeah, and the thing about the Rocket making the playoffs is they can finish anywhere from second to fifth right now. It's a very tight final week of the season, and I'm looking at the AHL playoff primer right now. They sit in third place, not that far behind the Syracuse Crunch, and on the Rockets schedule this week, Toronto, Syracuse in their final three games. They have a chance to knock the Marlies out of the playoffs, slide the Rochester Amherst in, and potentially clinch the second seed in the AHL North. And my big hope with this, and we talked a little bit about it last night, and I talked about it with some people in the Eyes on the Prize Slack, is now that they have clinched a playoff berth, like they know they are going to the postseason, hopefully everyone can just kind of, unclench, deep breath, and play the style of hockey they're known to play. Right now, Kevin Poulin is the starting goalie. Obviously, Caden Primo is up with the Canadiens, and we will touch on that in our next segment with Carey Price. I'm very interested to see what the next couple of weeks hold, because the Rocket, and I'm looking at their goal differential and stuff here, they were cruising along behind Utica there, and then they had two bad games, and it just flipped in a heartbeat. And it's going to be a very interesting couple of games here, because Toronto has always played them tough. They always have a hard game. And then Syracuse is a tough opponent, and they're very much their likely first round opponent. I'm very interested to see which veterans step up now, because there's been a few that have gone missing. We've seen good things from Joel Teasdale and Nate Schnarr, obviously Jesse Alonen, but the guys that helped push them to this point have kind of been missing in recent games with clinching on the line. And I think Jean-Francois Houle and the coaching staff and some of the younger guys are waiting for maybe a few of those vets to step up and be like, hey, let's end this on a good vibe. You don't want to go into the playoffs limping like the Canadiens did last year. Or maybe you do, because then you go to the Cup Finals, I guess. I'm not an expert. I just play one on TV, so.
Honestly, I think that it's exactly like you said. For whatever reason, whenever they had a chance to snatch the playoff clinch, they didn't rise to the occasion, right? Before that, they were doing everything it took. Like, we watched them in successive games, right? They won like four in a row when they really needed to put to advance enough to kind of put themselves in a positive position. I do think that, now's a good chance for them to just kind of chill and just focus on getting back to playing the way that they can play. And I think, for me, what I think is so important is that there have been some guys that have really had to take on a lot of weight given all the injuries and all of the call-ups to Montreal. And there's been just so much upheaval that I'm really, really impressed that they have gotten it this far. I mean, any AHL team is at risk of losing their players to the NHL team, right? But in this case, it was so excessive because Montreal set a record for man games lost to injury. But I do think that on the flip side of that, that NHL experience helped some of those guys that are now going to be leading the charge in the AHL. There's some names that you constantly hear, like Teasdale, for example, Raphael Harvey Pinard, Sami Nico just gliding out there. There are so many guys that you hear are kind of taking on the bulk of the play, I guess, the contribution to making this lineup. But that doesn't mean that there is a single player on this lineup that doesn't deserve to be in the playoffs.
Yeah, and like I look at this team and I'm looking through their roster right now. They have a lot of names because of all the AHL and NHL call-ups, and they're missing names off of this list. Justin Barron was supposed to be down with the team for the playoff run. He is injured. He's done for the year. Josh Brook is playing in the ECHL after coming back from his injury. Laurent Dauphin is called up. Michael Bezzetta is called up. Lucas Vedemo is injured. They just got Corey Schooneman back. They've had to go through a lot to get to this point here, and it's a very balanced scoring group across the top there, and that's where they thrive, is that they have 4 lines that are usually very strong, and we haven't added in CHL call-ups after their seasons and this and that. I don't know how many there'll be here. They'll be here before the playoffs start, but there's always that chance. They need to find that balance they had against Cleveland and Utica and Toronto in the weeks where they had to win these games to secure that top 3 spot there that they had in the division. And I think they can rise to that occasion. It's been a bumpy ride recently, which is, not hard to understand why. There's a lot that happened after the trade deadline. There's a lot that happened with call-ups and injuries and travel and this and that. I'm very interested to see who they play, because there's no easy outs in the playoffs. And like Syracuse is a good team. Toronto is a good team. Belleville is a good team. Rochester is a good team. Utica is obviously a good team, but they can't play them. Everything presents a challenge to them. They got to either overcome teams they've struggled with like Syracuse and Belleville, or they got to play a series against their most heated rival in the Toronto Marlies. It's not going to be easy, and it's a perfect time for some of these guys. Hey, step up. This means a lot. The Habs AHL affiliates have not made the playoffs since 2017 when they were the Ice Caps, and they haven't really done anything since they were the Hamilton Bulldogs in that same time frame. So it's been a while, and it's the perfect opportunity for a lot of guys to come in and, stake a claim and really prove that they belong back in this organization, or, that they deserve the next call-up, or, whatever next season, guys like Raphael Harvey Pinard, etc. Obviously, we will keep you posted with the Rocket recaps and everything as the playoffs go on. But coming up next, we do have to talk about Carey Price. We have to talk about him not traveling to New York and what that potentially means for the Montreal Canadiens coming up. But first, we got to talk about HelloFresh. It is the best meal kit in, across the world, really, wherever it's available. And you get farm fresh, pre-portioned ingredients and seasonal recipes delivered right to your doorstep, so you can skip trips to the grocery store, skip the lines and everything else. And it makes home cooking easy, fun, and affordable. And it's America's #1 meal kit. If I, a kitchen idiot, can use HelloFresh to make very delicious things for my wonderful girlfriend who is in the other room right now listening to this, you can too. They have so many options to diversify the menu. You can get things like salmon limon, pasta primavera, and you can pick favorite of 50 different weekly options. And you can skip weeks if you need to, change your delivery date, update your preferences, whatever you need in the HelloFresh app. I'm telling you, you're missing out if you're not trying it. And if you go to HelloFresh.com/LockedOn16 and use code LockedOn16, you're going to get 16 free meals and 3 free gifts. There's no reason to not check this out, folks. HelloFresh.com/LockedOn16 and code LockedOn16 for 16 free meals and 3 free gifts. All right, so we got to do the thing that I don't think any Habs fan really wants to do right now. No, we're not going to talk about Bruno. We're going to talk about Carey Price and the fact that How do you not immediately feel afraid that they emergency recalled Caden Primo for the game on Sunday? Then when Carey Price, it's not a setback. He's just not traveling to New York, and he should be okay by Friday's finale against the Florida Panthers. And I don't know if it's just Canadiens fans, as we are, have been freaked out about Carey Price's knee or hip or whatever has been for the last, 4 years at this point. And I am a little bit afraid of this because it is a big cap commitment to a big key piece of this team, and we're not 100% sure if he's going to be ready, or we're hoping he's ready, but we don't know. Because I looked at him in that game against the Senators, and there were a lot of movements that didn't feel very Carey Price-like, and I want to make sure that I'm not just panicking and overthinking it here.
It isn't Montreal without a goalie controversy, and this season has been very full of goalie controversies. I think that had this been, November, January, I'd be worried for the rest of the season, right? It's not. The Canadiens have literally 2 games left, one of which we know that Carey Price is not playing in. It could be a situation where it's just rust, where his recovery was good enough for him to get into games, but just not good enough for him to be the old Carey Price. There are hints still that he still has that athleticism. He still has that reaction time, but you can tell that some of the movements are labored. Some of the movements are not effortless. You were used to watching Carey Price make everything look easy, and we haven't seen that. He hasn't played that many games. We haven't seen that yet, but it's very much like he told reporters, he told us, right? Like, this is the kind of injury, the sport that I play and the position that I play, it takes a little longer to get back. So I do think that one of the reasons they probably wanted him to play some games this season is to see how far he is on that front. So I'm not ready to panic just yet. I just think it's really weird the way that it was an emergency call up and all of that. And maybe Carey Price just needed rest and therapy on Sunday instead of being the backup. Because if you're the backup, you could get called in if something happens to Samuel Montembeault, right? So maybe they just really, really wanted to make sure he didn't play and monitor maybe how his recovery was, right? Like, he played on Saturday night, see how he feels on Sunday. He's not traveling and so he gets a little bit more rest. He's probably going to be staying behind and doing some work on the ice, probably. And they said that he should be ready to come back to Florida. So I really do think that Carey Price has done this long enough at a level high enough that he probably knows that when something's not right, right? We saw that something's not right. You think Carey Price doesn't know something's not right? So I do think that the team is kind of also, as Martin St. Louis said, we're leaving it up to Carey Price. They're letting him be involved in the decision. I think that that's also a positive sign. It's important for him to be in tune with his body. I don't see this as something where it's like it's a setback. I see it more as he needs more time to loosen up from all of that time he spent not doing goaltending. And as for Caden Primo, I don't think this is too big a deal, because if Carey Price is going to be ready to go for Friday, then Caden Primo is going to go back to Laval, and Laval's going to have its own goalie controversy, although from the last few games, it does seem like Poulin can handle the net if called upon, and it does seem like I would play him to start. I don't know. Thoughts?
The hard part about this is that the Canadiens play Tuesday at 7:30 against the Rangers, and Caden Primo will very much, unless something drastic has changed.
Wednesday against
No,
the Rangers.
they play on Tuesday.
It's Tuesday? I'm like 90% sure it's Wednesday.
Oh, Jesus. Oh, well, never. So
no, I'll tell you why. Because I'm going to be on Game Over after that game, potentially reuniting with another guest. We can't confirm until I see it on the call sheet. And then I will also be on Game Over on Friday after the Panthers game. Also, the guest cannot currently be confirmed. But either way, that's why I know, is because I have to, be on Game Over before we record. And it is Wednesday. And that's why I was like looking at the Laval schedule, and I was like, there's a Laval game on Thursday. I have confirmed that.
So there is a Rocket game Wednesday night, and there's a Rocket game Thursday against Toronto. And here's the thing about that is I thought the Habs played on Tuesday, which would have been phenomenal because then after that game, you just send Caden Primo back to the Rocket, and then he gets to start one of those 2 games against Toronto, which are crucial games like we talked about in our first segment here. Kevin Poulin can handle himself, but God forbid if anything should go wrong, I believe the current backup is Owen Savory, who they signed to an ATO out of UMass Lowell. He was very good in the NCAA this year, but their plan B is hoping to God that a tryout goalie can step in. I assume Primo will go back down after the game on Wednesday night and probably be there Thursday in Laval to play the Marlies. If not, he will obviously be there for the weekend, the last game in Syracuse. But it's less than an ideal situation. That trickles all the way down to the ECHL, where the Lions are relying on not regular, starting goaltenders. It's a big trickle down effect. And obviously this wouldn't be an issue if Jake Allen was also not injured and et cetera, et cetera. It's going to be a very, I don't want to say narrow week because I don't think that's the way I want to phrase it, but it's going to have a lot of thin margins for some of these goalies here. And Caden Primo played very well in a game that they lost 5-1. If not for him, that's an even bigger blowout. I thought Kevin Poulin played fairly well in a game they lost, even if it was a blowout. And they get their heads on straight, I'm not nearly as worried about it. So my biggest thing is I'm hoping Carey Price is able to, like you said, he's just working through that rust from not having played in the position that he plays, being one that takes longer to get back from. It's not an easy job, and I don't think anyone would say otherwise. It's just not hard for me to feel a little bit worried sometimes. And I know that some of that is just regular hockey anxiety, but the way this year has gone, it feels like there's just one last real kick in the butt coming from the hockey gods for the run last year. And this just feels like it's set up to be way too perfect. It feels like it's way too obvious of a Chekhov's gun to not be that thing.
I totally hear you, but at the same time, he was off the ice for 8.5 months. Sorry, he did come back to the ice, but he was not playing games for 8.5 months, right? So I think that's one thing that it keeps me, it soothes my worries on that front. I also think Jake Allen getting a lot of rest is going to help in this offseason. Assuming neither of them gets traded, I'm looking at the Habs and I'm like, this is going to be Allen and Price again. So
yeah.
I'm happy with that, and I'm hoping that, it continues. Also, I'm really excited that we're talking about the Rocket. I don't know. I'm getting really, I'm now, I'm firmly on the bandwagon. This used to be your baby, but now I'm like, no, I want to go to games. I'm trying to recruit people to go with me. I'm like, let's talk about this on the podcast every single day. So I'm all in on the Rocket, and I hope our listeners are too, because I know that there aren't that many, people that were paying attention up until they got good. So, or I will say they weren't worth paying all that attention to, but now with this new era of Laval actually winning games and actually being good, I'm excited, and I hope you join us for the ride.
It's going to be a great time. And in our final segment, speaking of great times, we're going to talk about the not so great times that NHL officials had this weekend. But first, this episode is brought to you by a Rock Auto, and there's so many makes and models of cars. It can be intimidating and sometimes even pointless to find what you are looking for at a local chain store. And even if you do find it, you're going to pay 30, 50, even 100% more than you will at rockauto.com. Go there and save your time and money. rockauto.com is at home and in your pocket. And they're a family business serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years. Reliably low prices for every single customer. You can get brake parts, tail lamps, motor oil, even new carpet, anything you could possibly need for your car, whether it be that muscle car you restored in your garage or just your daily driver to and from work. They have what you are looking for. So go to rockauto.com, explore their easy-to-use website, and find the solution to your auto parts needs. And when you're done, at rockauto.com, see all the parts available, this, that, and the other thing. Write Locked On in there. How did you hear about us box so they know that we sent you? Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. All right, so I know a lot of people like when I yell and scream and stomp my feet and cause a scene when I'm talking about officiating and this and that. I don't have the energy in me to do that today because it's exhausting at this point. But the last week of just NHL officiating has been so disastrous that every single fan base has had a very good complaint to be made. The Toronto Tampa game was a disaster piece. The Habs Bruins game was a disaster. The Habs Flyers game featured a goal that should not have counted. And the officials looked at the Flyers bench, looked right at Mike Yeo and went, no, you can't challenge that, even though he is in fact allowed to challenge a hand pass on a goal. And then the next game, a hand pass was immediately wiped out a goal. And I just look at this and I go, what is the standard for NHL officiating? It's one thing to be like, oh, I missed an offside, or hey, I missed this hook or hold behind the play. It's another to have an impact on things that lead directly to goals. Obviously, we are a Montreal Canadiens podcast. Brendan Gallagher setting up a goal, cool, that's great. Shouldn't have counted. And then I look at that Bruins game and I look at Mike Hoffman's play there on Erik Haula. It's so egregious that even Jack Edwards, who is about as homerific as it gets, looked at that and went, that's horrible. And it led to a penalty shot and it led to a 2-0 goal for the Bruins. And it's just, the NHL has an officiating problem. It's very bad across the board. And this is not just the Canadiens. The Canadiens have benefited from bad officiating before. Everyone has. It's a problem. And the playoffs are what, 3 games away in most cases, where it's just going to get worse. At no point in time should anyone know the names of the officials who are on the ice in a given game. If you do, that means they're doing a terrible job. It's the same thing with MLB umpires. Angel Hernandez only trends because he sucks at his job, and I don't want to see that in the NHL. I don't want to know what officials are reffing the game because I don't want to know how that game's going to go before the puck even drops.
I think one of the things is that prior to, like, there's a whole bunch of referees and officials that have retired in the last few years, that we kind of could identify what their thought process was. You know, there were some guys where it was like they called everything. There were some that kind of felt let them play. There were some that thought that their role was to tell the story of the game. And we kind of could identify them. But now I don't think they kind of know themselves anymore. And I do know, I understand that right now this is a topic that's under a great deal of scrutiny. And I don't blame, you know, the fans, the media, even the NHL probably behind the scenes. They're kind of looking at this and they're going, what is going on? But there's an absence of a clear message. There's an absence of a clear mandate. There's an absence of consensus. And there's an absence of desire to fix it. And that's the part that really bothers me is I think that it's possible, right? Like with all things, it's possible. The first thing you got to do is you got to appeal to more people to try and get to that level in officiating. We kind of talked about it a little bit in our last episode. We're going to talk about that a little bit more with somebody who's kind of an expert on officiating. We can talk about that, right? You have to appeal to more people to try to get to that level because it's really hard and there's a lot of barriers, right? You've got to make the job worth it because you have to be traveling a lot. You have to be away from your family. It's a physically demanding job and everybody hates you like that. You can't discount that, right? It's true. Like it sounds like I'm like, oh, they should just grow up and do their jobs, but I happen to do a job where if everybody hated me, I wouldn't want to do it, right? I mean, we talk about how mean comments affect us sometimes, and we're just 2 people on the YouTube. So I think that that's part of it is you've got to make the job more appealing to people with better schedules, maybe something more regional. I don't know. I have no idea because you kind of want to prevent bias as well. But at the same time, I also think that you have to do something. You have to either reimagine the whole process or retrain everybody in the same way. You have to be clearer in your messaging. You can't just be like, go out there and make sure those people don't kill each other. Because that is part of your job. But you go out there, you got to make sure that, you know, people talk so much about how many cross-checks people get away with. I mean, if you let me cross-check Brad Marchand in the face, I'm going to do it. You know what I mean? He's always in my face. He's always in my goalie's face. If you're going to let people cross-check Brendan Gallagher, do you think there's not a whole line of people that are waiting to do that? Like, So you've gotta make sure that you don't let people get away with smaller things that could lead to injuries, and then you prevent the bigger things, and then you talk about the finer points of the game, and you get the goalie interference calls right, you get those hand pass calls right, you get all of those things right. That, like, poor Mike Hoffman, man, he did one thing so right, it was so good, and he got penalized for it. It was just, anyway. All of this to say is that there are a lot of ways to fix it. There needs to be a willingness, and they need to do it. They need to do it.
I just look at all of this and I go, I don't know what the baseline standard for something is. It's like we talked about goalie interference a lot on this show. I don't know what the baseline standard for goalie interference is at any level. I do not know what the baseline standard for officiating is. Like it's been very rare that I've had a moment where I went, that was a very well called hockey game. I thought the penalties were fair. There's something egregious every night, and it's like, what is the baseline standard? And like you said, a lot of people have retired. Some people were forced into retirement because they admitted that the NHL calls penalties to even things up, which is a problem in and of itself and should still be a much bigger story. But here we are. If there's no standard, there's no way to keep games level. Like, I look at that Habs game last night, and immediately I look at that and how Brad Marchand was acting, and I go, you give him 10 and you send him to the room. Enough. We're not letting this spiral. Go do this. You're not creating any more drama out here. And then it continues, and et cetera, et cetera. I just don't know I don't know what to make of the standard anymore. And it's only going to get worse. And yes, there are some good refs that are coming up, but you still have to train more at the ECHL and the AHL level and in the junior leagues and in college. And there's just not enough. And that goes way, way down into, minor league systems there, like kids playing, because parents are, quite frankly, horrible people. I hear horror stories from people who have reffed in like the AJHL and other places. It's a disaster and below because parents are just nuts. And it has a ripple effect that now at the top level of the game, you've got missed calls all over the place that are having an impact. And it's a serious problem that the sooner the NHL actually addresses this, the better things can actually get here. And it's not going to be a quick change. They're not going to immediately be like, here's your new training and everyone's good at what they do now. It's going to take time. But like you said, you have to be willing to actually make that attempt. And the NHL right now is really not doing that in any way, shape, or form. Just, do what the NBA does. Have the officials available after the game and accountable for what they did. Be like, hey, we messed this up, or hey, I would do this differently next time. But right now, the NHL doesn't have any interest in fixing what's, ailing it, which is right on brand for the NHL. So we'll see what it looks like. We know the playoffs are going to be an absolute mess. We went through 4 rounds of it last year. It's not going to be great. And I guess we're going to see what's coming up with that. We'll obviously have a preview for the Rangers game coming up and more coming up in tomorrow's episode. Thank you, as always, for following along. You can follow us on Twitter at @LO_Canadians. You can follow Laura at The Active Stick. You can follow myself at Scott Matlin. You can follow this show on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. When you're done checking us out, please check out Locked On NHL. So for all the biggest stories around the NHL and around the hockey world, we will see you all next time.